Hi, welcome to the quiz. You can answer along on quizalto.com, all for free. The exact URL of this quiz will be in the notes down below. Let's get started, good luck. Which AWS offering provides infrastructure and services at the edge of the 5G network? AWS Wavelength, Amazon Aurora, Amazon ECS, Amazon VPC. AWS Wavelength provides infrastructure and services at the edge of the 5G network. Which AWS service allows developers to deploy their applications to the edge of the 5G network without needing to modify their existing code? AWS Wavelength, Amazon Elastic Beanstalk, Amazon DynamoDB, Amazon S3. AWS Wavelength enables developers to deploy their applications to the edge of the 5G network seamlessly without requiring any code modifications. What type of applications benefit from the reduced latency provided by AWS Wavelength? Real-time applications, archival storage applications, batch processing applications, backup applications. Real-time applications. What is the primary use case for AWS Wavelength? Ultra-low latency applications, batch processing, high-performance computing, big data analytics. AWS Wavelength is designed for applications that require ultra-low latency. What characteristic of AWS Wavelength enables it to deliver applications with minimal delay? Edge locations, data centers, availability zones, regions. AWS Wavelength leverages edge locations to deploy applications closer to end users. What is the primary goal of AWS Wavelength? Minimizing cost, enhancing security, maximizing throughput, reducing latency for end users. AWS Wavelength's primary goal is to reduce latency for end users by deploying applications closer to the edge of the 5G network. What is the primary focus of AWS Wavelength? Database management, network routing, edge computing for 5G networks, application development. AWS Wavelength's primary focus is on edge computing for 5G networks. Which AWS service provides the infrastructure for deploying applications closer to end users in 5G networks? Amazon Aurora, Amazon SNS, AWS Wavelength, Amazon CloudWatch. AWS Wavelength provides the necessary infrastructure for deploying applications closer to end users in 5G networks. What is the key advantage of deploying applications using AWS Wavelength compared to traditional cloud deployments? Higher availability, more security features, lower cost, lower latency. Deploying applications using AWS Wavelength reduces latency significantly compared to traditional cloud deployments. What type of applications benefit the most from using AWS Wavelength? Offline applications. Static websites. Archival storage. Real-time applications. Real-time applications such as gaming. What is the primary goal of AWS Wavelength zones? Improving data analytics. Enhancing network security. Increasing storage capacity. Reducing latency for end users. The primary goal of AWS Wavelength zones is to reduce latency for end users by deploying applications closer to their location. What is the minimum latency target for applications deployed using AWS Wavelength? Single-digit milliseconds. Triple-digit milliseconds. Seconds. Double-digit milliseconds. AWS Wavelength aims to achieve a minimum latency target of single-digit milliseconds for applications deployed at the edge of the 5G network. What AWS service enables developers to extend their applications to the edge of the 5G network without modifying their existing code? Amazon SQS. AWS Wavelength. Amazon RDS. Amazon Route 53. AWS Wavelength enables developers to extend their applications to the edge of the 5G network seamlessly without the need for code modifications. What type of applications benefit the most from deploying in AWS Wavelength zones? Static websites. Real-time applications. Archival storage applications. Batch processing applications. Real-time applications benefit the most from deploying in AWS Wavelength zones due to the ultra-low latency provided. Which AWS service allows developers to extend their application to the edge of the 5G network? AWS Wavelength. AWS CloudFormation. AWS IAM. AWS CloudTrail. AWS Wavelength allows developers to extend their applications to the edge of the 5G network. What is the main reason for using AWS Wavelength zones for application deployment? Reduced latency. Enhanced security. Cost savings. Global availability. The main reason for using AWS Wavelength zones for application deployment is to achieve reduced latency by placing applications closer to end users. What technology does AWS Wavelength leverage to deliver low-latency applications? Cloud storage. Edge computing. Virtualization. Blockchain. AWS Wavelength leverages edge computing to deliver low-latency applications by placing compute resources closer to end users. What is the main advantage of deploying applications using AWS Wavelength zones? Reduced latency. Enhanced security. Higher scalability. Lower cost. Deploying applications using AWS Wavelength zones reduces latency by bringing them closer to end users. What is the primary benefit of deploying applications using AWS Wavelength zones? Low latency access to end users. Cost effectiveness. High availability. Scalability. Deploying applications using AWS Wavelength zones provides low latency access to end users. What term describes the geographical locations where AWS Wavelength infrastructure is deployed? Data centers. Edge locations. Regions. Availability zones. AWS Wavelength infrastructure is deployed at edge locations. Which AWS service enables developers to build ultra-low latency applications for 5G devices? Amazon Redshift. Amazon VPC. Amazon RDS. AWS Wavelength. AWS Wavelength enables developers to deploy their applications at the edge of the 5G network. What technology does AWS Wavelength leverage to reduce latency for end users? Edge computing. Distributed computing. Cloud computing. Fog computing. AWS Wavelength leverages edge computing to reduce latency for end users by deploying applications closer to their location. What is the primary purpose of AWS Wavelength? Bringing AWS services to the edge of the 5G network. Providing AWS services for IoT devices. Expanding AWS services globally. Centralizing AWS services. AWS Wavelength's primary purpose is to bring AWS services closer to the edge of the 5G network. What is the maximum latency target for applications deployed using AWS Wavelength? Single-digit milliseconds. Double-digit milliseconds. Triple-digit milliseconds. Seconds. AWS Wavelength aims to achieve single-digit millisecond latency for applications deployed at the edge of the 5G network. What service provides AWS Wavelength? Amazon S3. AWS Lambda. Amazon EC2. AWS Wavelength. AWS Wavelength is a service that allows you to build applications that serve end users with single-digit millisecond latency over the 5G network using AWS infrastructure. And that's a wrap. Thanks to everyone who participated. Remember, you can answer along on quizalto.com, where you can keep track of your progress and find much more quizzes. We hope you had a fun and challenging time. Until next time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel for more. Hit the bell icon to be notified as soon as we upload. Please leave a comment if you have any thoughts or suggestions, and, if you think this video is worth sharing with someone who could benefit from it, please forward a link to them. See you next time. Thanks for watching.